Welcome to Dark Chronicle, where history's darkest shadows are brought quietly back to life. Tonight, we travel to Renaissance Italy, to the gilded courts of Rome and Ferrara, where power was purchased with poison and prayer in equal measure, where the most dangerous family in Europe held the keys to both heaven and hell, and where a young woman moved through the world like a figure in a painting, beautiful, composed, and surrounded, always, by death. Her name was Lucrezia Borgia. History has called her a poisoner, a seductress, a murderer, a pawn, a monster, a victim. The truth, as it always is, was more complicated than any of these. Let us begin. Lucrezia Borgia was born on the 18th of April, 1480, in a small town called Subiaco, in the hills east of Rome. She was the illegitimate daughter of Rodrigo Borgia, a Spanish-born cardinal of the Catholic Church who was, at the time of her birth, already one of the most powerful men in Rome, and who had become, in 1492, even more powerful when he was elected Pope Alexander VI. Her mother was Vanozza de Catane, a Roman woman of some social standing who had been Rodrigo's mistress for many years and who bore him 4 children who survived to adulthood: Giovanni, Cesare, Lucrezia, and Joffre. Rodrigo acknowledged all 4 children openly, which was unusual for the time. The Catholic Church's prohibition on clerical marriage and celibacy did not prevent its senior figures from having families, but it did usually prevent them from being quite so public about it. Rodrigo was not a man who was troubled by inconsistency between his public role and his private life. Lucrezia grew up in Rome, in the household of a female relative of her father's, a respectable arrangement for an illegitimate child of a powerful man, providing her with education and social formation while keeping her at a slight remove from the more scandalous aspects of her father's establishment. She was, by all accounts, an exceptional child, blonde, which was considered particularly beautiful in the dark-haired Italian courts of the period, with grey eyes and a quality of composed attention that people found variously charming and unsettling. She was educated in the manner considered appropriate for a woman of her station: languages, music, poetry, the social arts that would make her useful in the diplomatic world that her father inhabited. She learned Latin. She spoke Spanish, her father's native language, as well as Italian. She was, by the time she was a young woman, genuinely accomplished, not in the sense that the word is sometimes used dismissively as a polite synonym for decorative, but in the real sense of a person who had absorbed a genuine education and could deploy it. She was also, from a very early age, a political instrument. This is the first and most important thing to understand about Lucrezia Borgia's life. She was not, primarily, a person. She was, in the political economy of Renaissance Italy, an asset, a tool of alliance-making, a piece to be moved across the board of dynastic politics by the men who controlled her. Her father understood this clearly. Her brother Cesare understood it even more clearly. Lucrezia herself understood it too, in time, though the understanding came at considerable personal cost. Her first engagement was arranged when she was 11 years old. She was betrothed to a Spanish nobleman. Then the engagement was broken off when her father's political calculations changed. She was then betrothed to another man, and that engagement was also broken off. These were not unusual events in Renaissance dynastic politics. Betrothals were made and unmade with the regularity of business contracts, which is essentially what they were. But they established early the pattern of Lucrezia's existence, her life arranged and rearranged by others according to needs that had nothing to do with her. Her first actual marriage took place in 1493, when she was 13 years old. Her husband was Giovanni Sforza, the Lord of Pesaro, a man of 32, chosen because the Sforza family of Milan was, at that moment, politically useful to Rodrigo Borgia. The marriage was celebrated with considerable pomp in Rome, the festivities lasting several days, the guest list including virtually every significant figure in the Roman ecclesiastical and aristocratic world. Giovanni Sforza was not, by any account, a remarkable man. He was competent enough in the governance of his small territory, physically present but not particularly distinguished, the kind of man who fills a role adequately without ever transcending it. Whether the marriage was happy, whether Lucrezia found any warmth or companionship in it, is difficult to say with certainty from the distance of 5 centuries. What is clear is that it did not last long. By 1497, the political landscape had shifted sufficiently that the Sforza alliance was no longer useful to Rodrigo Borgia. The marriage needed to end. An annulment was sought from the church, which was, given that Rodrigo was the Pope, not a particularly difficult thing to obtain. The grounds offered were impotence, specifically that Giovanni Sforza was unable to consummate the marriage, and that Lucrezia was therefore still a virgin. Giovanni Sforza was furious. He was not impotent, he insisted, and he could prove it. He had been married before, and his first wife had died in childbirth. The impotence claim was a lie, he said, and everyone knew it was a lie, and the real reason the Borgias wanted rid of him was that he was no longer politically useful, and they had someone else in mind. He was right on all counts, but he was also in a weak position. He was a minor lord trying to argue with a pope. And in the end, he signed the annulment document, accepting the humiliating legal fiction of his own impotence in exchange for being allowed to keep the substantial dowry Lucrezia had brought to the marriage. It was during the period of this annulment process in 1497 and 1498 that the darker rumors about Lucrezia Borgia began to circulate in their most virulent form. The rumors were not new. The Borgias had been the subject of scandal and speculation since Rodrigo's election as Pope, his open acknowledgement of his illegitimate children, his flagrant nepotism in advancing their careers, the general atmosphere of corruption and excess that surrounded the papal court under his pontificate had given Rome's gossip machine ample material to work with. But the rumors that circulated about Lucrezia specifically during and after the annulment proceedings went considerably further than garden variety scandal. It was said that she was not merely her father's political instrument, but his lover. It was said that Cesare, her brother, was equally her lover. It was said that the Borgia household was a site of incest and depravity that went beyond anything Rome had seen before, and Rome had seen a great deal. These accusations appeared in the dispatches of foreign ambassadors, in satirical verses circulated through the city, in the letters of contemporaries who had every reason to damage the Borgia name. Giovanni Sforza himself made the accusation explicitly in the context of the annulment dispute. He claimed that the real reason the Borgias wanted Lucrezia back was because her father wanted her for himself. Whether any of this was true is a question that historians have debated for centuries and have not definitively resolved. The accusation of incest with her father is regarded by most serious historians as almost certainly false, a piece of political weaponry deployed by the Borgias' many enemies, of whom there were a great number, and who had both the motive and the means to manufacture such stories. The accusation regarding Cesare is slightly more complicated, in that the relationship between Lucrezia and her brother was, by any contemporary account, unusually intense. But intensity of sibling attachment is not evidence of incest, and the specific accusation remains unproven. What is clear is that Lucrezia was caught in the middle of a propaganda war that she had no power to control, and that the accusations, true or false, shaped her reputation for centuries afterward, long after everyone involved was dead. Her second marriage, arranged in 1498, was to Alfonso of Aragon, an illegitimate son of the King of Naples, young and handsome and by all accounts genuinely pleasant, a man who seems to have inspired in Lucrezia something that her first marriage had not: actual affection. Contemporary accounts describe the couple as happy, or at least as happy as people in their position could reasonably be. Alfonso was charming. Lucrezia was, for the first time in her life, in a marriage that she had not clearly been forced into against her will. It lasted 2 years. In 1500, Alfonso of Aragon was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica by unknown assailants and left seriously wounded. Lucrezia nursed him herself, staying at his bedside, managing his care with the focused attention of someone determined that this marriage at least would not be taken from her. He was recovering. He seemed to be out of danger. Then, in August of 1500, he was strangled in his sick room. The murder was ordered. It was widely understood at the time, and is accepted by most historians now, by Cesare Borgia. The exact reason is less clear: political calculation, personal animosity, a shift in alliance patterns that made the Aragonese connection inconvenient. Cesare did not explain himself. He rarely did. Lucrezia was widowed at 20 years old, for the second time, by her own brother. Rest now. The candles of Renaissance Rome burn low. The corridors of the Vatican are quiet. The plotting paused for the night. The beautiful and terrible Borgia family at rest behind their gilded doors. You are safe. You are warm. History is far away. Simply rest. The story will continue when you are ready. The death of Alfonso of Aragon changed something in Lucrezia Borgia. It would be too simple to say it hardened her. People are not simply hardened by loss. They are reshaped by it in ways that are more complex and more interesting than hardness. What the death of Alfonso did was clarify something. It stripped away whatever remaining illusions she might have carried about the nature of the world she inhabited and the family she belonged to. She had known intellectually that the Borgias were dangerous. She had lived in the abstract with the knowledge that power and violence were inseparable in Renaissance Italy, that the men around her were capable of things that ordinary moral categories struggled to contain. But Alfonso had been hers. He had been the one thing in her life that seemed to exist outside the calculations and the maneuvering, the one relationship that had not been entirely constructed for someone else's benefit. And Cesare had had him killed, in her sick room. while she was nursing him back to health. She did not break. She did not retreat. She did not rage publicly against her brother or her father, which would have been both futile and dangerous. She did what the women of her world had always done with intolerable things. She absorbed it, and she continued, but she was not the same. Her third marriage was arranged in 1501. Her husband was Alfonso d'Este, the heir to the Duchy of Ferrara, one of the most significant and cultured courts in Italy, a place of genuine artistic and intellectual distinction, removed from Rome and from the Borgia world by both geography and temperament. The Este family was ancient and proud, and not particularly enthusiastic about the match. Lucrezia's reputation, shaped by years of Roman gossip and political warfare, preceded her, and the Este were not eager to introduce a Borgia into their bloodline. They had little choice. Rodrigo Borgia was still Pope, and Cesare Borgia was at that moment at the height of his military and political power, carving out a personal domain in central Italy with a combination of military force and diplomatic ruthlessness that made him one of the most feared men in Europe. The Este could negotiate the terms of the marriage, but they could not refuse it entirely, without consequences they were not prepared to face. The negotiations were lengthy, and the dowry was enormous. In January of 1502, Lucrezia Borgia left Rome for the last time. She was 21 years old. She would never return. The journey to Ferrara was a progress of extraordinary splendor, a procession of hundreds of people, carriages and horses and baggage trains stretching for miles, passing through the towns of northern Italy with all the ceremony that the occasion demanded. Lucrezia rode or was carried at the center of it, dressed in cloth of gold, composed as always, her expression giving nothing away to the crowds that gathered to watch her pass. She arrived in Ferrara in February 1502, and there, in the court that would be her home for the remaining 18 years of her life, something unexpected happened. She thrived. This is the part of Lucrezia Borgia's story that tends to be overlooked because it does not fit the dramatic narrative of poison and incest and political murder that has made her name famous. The Lucrezia of popular imagination is a creature of the Roman years, young, beautiful, dangerous, surrounded by the spectacular corruption of the Borgia pontificate. The Lucrezia of Ferrara is a different person, or rather, the same person in different circumstances. And what those circumstances revealed was something that the Roman years had kept largely hidden. She was capable, genuinely, practically, substantially capable. Alfonso d'Este was not, initially, an enthusiastic husband. He had not wanted this marriage, and he did not pretend otherwise. He had his own life, his own interests, his own mistresses. He was a man of his time and class, and fidelity was not among the virtues he particularly valued. The marriage began as a political arrangement, conducted with appropriate ceremony and minimal warmth. But Lucrezia did not require warmth to function. She had grown up in the Borgia household, where warmth was a tactical tool rather than a genuine emotion, and she had developed over the years a capacity to operate effectively in environments that offered her very little. She learned Ferrara. She learned its court, its politics, its personalities, its history. She made alliances carefully and maintained them with attention. When Alfonso was away, which was often, given the military demands of the period, She governed in his absence, and she governed well. There are records of her interventions in local disputes, her management of the court's finances, her correspondence with the political figures of the day, that reveal a woman of considerable practical intelligence operating at full capacity. She was also, in these years, a genuine patron of the arts. The court of Ferrara was already, before Lucrezia's arrival, one of the great centres of Italian Renaissance culture. The Este had been patrons of poets and painters and musicians for generations. Lucrezia added her own dimension to this. She had a particular connection with the poets of the day, and the most famous of these connections was with Ludovico Ariosto, and, more significantly, with Pietro Bembo. Pietro Bembo was one of the great literary figures of the Italian Renaissance, a Venetian humanist scholar and poet who would eventually become a cardinal of the church and who is remembered as one of the architects of the Italian literary language. His correspondence with Lucrezia, which survives in the archives and has been extensively studied by historians, reveals a relationship of genuine intellectual and emotional intensity. Whether it was a love affair in the physical sense is debated. The letters suggest a passionate attachment that may or may not have been consummated, and the ambiguity is probably deliberate on both sides. What is certain is that Bembo found in Lucrezia a woman of genuine cultivation and emotional depth, and that she found in him something that her marriages had not provided, a relationship conducted on terms of intellectual equality, or something approaching it. She kept a lock of his hair. He kept a strand of her golden hair. The letters passed back and forth for years, full of the elaborate courtly language of the period, and underneath it, something that feels, across the centuries, like real feeling. Meanwhile, the world she had left behind was collapsing. In August of 1503, Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, died in Rome. The cause was almost certainly malaria, though at the time and afterward, the rumor circulated that he had been poisoned, perhaps accidentally by poison intended for someone else, perhaps deliberately. The Borgias had made so many enemies, and poison had been so frequently attributed to them as a weapon, that it seemed fitting to their contemporaries that the patriarch of the family should die by the same means. With Rodrigo's death, the entire structure of Borgia power began to disintegrate with extraordinary speed. Cesare, who had built his domain in central Italy on the foundation of his father's authority as pope, found that authority evaporating the moment his father died. The new pope was not friendly. The territories Cesare had conquered began to slip away. He fought to hold them with the ferocious energy that characterized everything he did. But the foundation was gone, and without it, the structure could not stand. Within 2 years, Cesare Borgia, the most feared man in Italy, the model who Machiavelli would hold up as the exemplar of the new political man, the prince in action, was dead. He died in a minor skirmish in Spain in 1507, at 31 years old, stripped of everything he had built. He was buried without ceremony. The Borgia moment was over. Lucrezia received the news of her brother's death in Ferrara. She was 26 years old. She had lost her father. She had lost the brother who had murdered her husband. She had lost the world she had grown up in. For all its darkness, it was the world she had known, and its disappearance left her in a curious freedom. She had Ferrara. She had Alfonso, who had grown over the years into something more than a reluctant husband, not a romantic partner in any conventional sense, but a man who had come to respect her capacity and rely on her judgment, which was, in the political world they inhabited, a more durable foundation than romance. She had her children. She bore Alfonso several children, though not all of them survived infancy, which was the particular grief that shadowed every woman's life in this period, regardless of her social position. And she had her court, her poets, her correspondence, the daily work of a woman who had found in the governance of a Renaissance duchy something that suited her in a way that nothing in her earlier life had. The final years of Lucrezia Borgia's life were marked by a deepening religiosity that historians have sometimes interpreted as guilt, and sometimes as genuine faith, and sometimes as the natural turn of a person who has survived remarkable things and is trying to make sense of them. She wore a hair shirt beneath her court clothes. She gave generously to religious institutions. She spent time in the convent of Corpus Domini in Ferrara, not as a nun, but as a retreatant, seeking in its quiet something that the court could not provide. She was pregnant for the last time in 1519. The pregnancy was difficult from the beginning, and those around her were afraid for her. The child, a girl, was born in June and died almost immediately. Lucrezia did not recover from the birth. She died on the 24th of June, 1519. She was 39 years old. Alfonso d'Este, the man who had not wanted to marry her and had spent their early years together in barely concealed indifference, wrote to her father-in-law after her death in terms that were not the formal expressions of dynastic condolence, but something that reads across the centuries like genuine grief. He had lost, he wrote, the dearest companion of his life. She was buried in the convent of Corpus Domini in Ferrara, where she had spent so many hours in the last years of her life. Her tomb was simple. The woman who had been described as the most dangerous in Italy, poisoner, seductress, instrument of Borgia corruption, was buried in a nun's chapel with the quiet dignity of someone who had, in the end, made something real out of circumstances that had never been designed with her welfare in mind. The poison legend persisted. It persists still. Google her name, and the first thing you will find is the story of the hollow ring she supposedly wore to dispense poison into the drinks of her enemies, a story for which there is no contemporary evidence whatsoever, which appeared centuries after her death, and which has attached itself to her name with the tenacity of all the best historical fictions. The real Lucrezia Borgia was more interesting than the legend. She was a woman born into one of the most dangerous families in European history, used as a political instrument from childhood, twice widowed by the calculations of men who controlled her life. And yet she managed, in the 18 years she spent in Ferrara, away from Rome and away from the Borgia shadow, to build something of her own. A court, a reputation for governance, genuine relationships of intellectual and emotional substance, a life, however constrained by the circumstances she had not chosen, that was recognizably hers. That is not nothing. In the world she inhabited, for a woman of her position, it was very nearly everything. Good night. This has been Dark Chronicle. We will be here again with another story from history's shadow. Until then, rest well.